The U.S. presidential election now less than 3 weeks away. Will it be Kamala Harris making history or Donald Trump returning to the White House? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. As election day draws ever closer, both major candidates are in all-out campaign mode. Votes are already being cast in early voting. The Democratic Party nominee, Kamala Harris, has been making her case to voters across key battleground states, and her Republican challenger, Donald Trump, is also pushing his agenda as he hopes to win over those who are still undecided. Later in the show, we will discuss recent developments in the contest, but we begin with the distinguished professor of history at American University, Allan Lichtman. Allan, great to see you. It's been some time.
It has. Glad to be with you.
Great to have you. Now, you're in the business of predicting the winners of elections. Your system focuses on governing rather than campaigning, and you look at 13 keys to gauge the weakness or the strengths of the incumbent party in the White House. You also discount polls and pundits, and you've been spectacularly accurate. I mean, as I've just said, you've predicted correctly 9 times out of 10 in presidential elections. What are the elements that make your system so accurate?
Yeah, I would say 10 of 10 because I called Gore in 2000, and as I proved in my report to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, because of the tossing out disproportionately of black votes, Gore should have won that election going away, but we're not here to relitigate that. My system is accurate because, as you say, it doesn't look at the pundits, who I love, but have no scientific basis for prediction, doesn't look at the polls, which are snapshots, not predictors. It taps into how elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. The other reason it works so well is developmentally, I covered the period 1860 to 1980, going all the way back to the horse and buggy days of politics, when Abraham Lincoln was elected. So the keys have survived enormous changes in our society, our politics, our economics, and our demography. I first used the keys for prediction when I predicted Ronald Reagan's re-election in April 1982, nearly 3 years ahead of time, when America was in the worst recession to date since the Great Depression, and 60% of Americans said he was too old to run again. And of course, I predicted Donald Trump against all the pundits and pollsters in 2016, which did not make me very popular in 90% plus Democratic DC, where I teach at American University.
Now, can you quickly run through some of the major keys and what it takes to turn one of those keys?
Yes, here's how it works. If 6 or more of the keys turn against the White House party, they're predicted losers. Otherwise, they're predicted winners. That's the threshold. 6 keys and you're out, fewer, you're in. And they're all counted equally. U.S. House elections, contest for the nomination of the incumbent party, incumbency, third party, policy change, social unrest, scandal, short and long-term economy, foreign military failures and successes, and only 2 keys have anything to do with the candidates, and they're very high threshold keys, asking whether the challenger and incumbent party candidates are those once in a generation, across the board appealing candidates like Franklin Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan.
Right now, Alan, what about, the political environment is constantly changing. It's not static. It changes all the time. The domestic environment changes. The international environment changes. Does that change the way you predict who's going to be the winner?
It doesn't. You know, my favorite comedian is the late Gilda Radner, and her character, Rosanna Dana, was famous for saying, there's always something. And every 4 years, people tell me, you got to change your keys. We have a black man running. Never had that before. America's not ready to elect an African American. We have a woman running. We have an October surprise of a candidate bragging on tape of sexually assaulting women. But You cannot change a model on the fly. That's a recipe for error. If I'd done that, I wouldn't have predicted Trump and I wouldn't have predicted Obama in 2008. And remember how robust the keys are. Going all the way back to 1860, no automobiles, no planes, no radio, no television, no polls. Women couldn't vote. African Americans were enslaved. We were an agricultural economy.
Now, what about something like the charisma key? I mean, there are those who would argue that Trump should get that key because of the hardcore, very loyal following that he has.
I've heard that 1,000 times this year, and it doesn't matter what you think of Trump or his hardcore following. You've got to stick to how the keys are defined and how they've been answered since 1860. And when you read my book, Predicting the Next President, it's crystal clear Donald Trump does not fit the definition, which is you can't just appeal to a narrow base. You have to be like Reagan or FDR, be very broadly appealing and transformational. As president, Trump's average approval rating in the Gallup poll was 41%, the narrow base, put him right at the bottom of all presidents. In 2 elections, he lost the vote of the people by a combined 10 million votes. In a decade almost since he became a candidate, his approval rating has been stuck in the low 40% range. So it doesn't matter what you think, you can't just appeal to a narrow base and meet this key.
So what about the incumbent party right now? When you look at all those elements that you're talking about, those keys that you're talking about, how have they performed?
Yes. Remember, the key thing is 6 keys and they're out. So what keys have they lost? The mandate key, because they lost U.S. House elections in 2022. The incumbency key, because Biden is not running. And I was very critical of the Democrats for viciously trashing their incumbent president right out in public. Didn't have to do that. But I also thought they were headed for disaster, that they would also have a big party brawl when they pushed Biden out. But somehow, maybe listen to me, I doubt it, Democrats grew a spine and a brain, united behind Harris, and avoided losing my next key, the contest key. So they're down mandate, incumbency, they're down foreign military failure. I count the Middle East as a disaster. It's a humanitarian catastrophe with no end in sight, and the U.S. is heavily invested there. And incumbent charisma. You know, she's been a candidate for a few months. She hasn't yet reached, if she ever would, the status of a Franklin Roosevelt. So that's 4 keys down, still 2 keys short of predicting an incumbent party defeat. That's why the keys predict we're going to have a new path-breaking president, the first woman president, and the first president of mixed African and Asian descent, which is kind of where America's going. We're rapidly becoming a majority-minority country. Old white guys like me are on the way out.
Now, there are political analysts who say that this is going to be a very tight election, that it'll be just small margins in key swing states that could decide the outcome of this election. And you just told us a moment ago, you don't listen to the pundits. But given that it's going to be that tight, and given that opinions are changing all the time, I mean, the more we see of what's going on, for instance, in Gaza right now, opinions change. Are you nervous that you might have to change your mind about this?
I'm not going to change my mind. The biggest myth in American politics is the October surprise. I talked about the biggest October surprise ever, the Access Hollywood tape with Trump bragging about sexually assaulting women. That didn't make me change my mind. I've always made my calls before any so-called October surprise. And once I've made a final prediction, I haven't changed it. Does that mean I'm not nervous? I'm 77. I've been doing this for 42 years. And every 4 years, I get butterflies in my stomach. Because unlike the compilers of polls like Nate Silver, I don't just give you probabilities, and then when the candidate I predicted lost, say, well, I told you there was a 20% plus chance, you know, she would lose. I tell you who's going to win or lose, so I can be proven right or wrong. I haven't been wrong yet, I don't think. Can I be wrong? Of course. I'm a human being. And I'm not psychic Gene Dixon with a crystal ball. I'm not Speaker Mike Johnson, who thinks the Almighty speaks to him. My predictions are based on 160 years of history. Can that pattern be broken by something cataclysmic and unprecedented? Possibly, but you would never know that until afterwards. That's why I don't change my predictions on the fly, no matter how vigorous my critics. And of course, in over 40 years, I have absorbed every conceivable criticism, from the scholarly to the scurrilous and the violent and the threatening.
Still, Allan, when you do this analysis, when you look very closely at the people who are running and you look at those keys, do you ever consider things like the fact that it could just be a few thousand votes in a few states, possibly even a few counties, that's going to decide the election?
I've been right in some of the closest elections in history, 2016, 2020, both of which were decided by small numbers of votes in swing states. 1960, another, retrospectively cliffhanger election. So I can't change my prediction in anticipation of the election being close.
Professor Allan Lichtman, thanks so much for joining us.
My great pleasure. Great questions.
Thank you. Well, time now to hear from our panel. Joining me is attorney and Republican strategist Adolfo Franco. Also with us is Douglas Sloan. He is principal at the National Capital Strategy Group. And joining us right here in the studio is Rafael Bernal. He is a staff writer with The Hill newspaper. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Adolfo, let me start with you. We are less than 3 weeks away from the election. What is your reading of where this is going right now?
Well, I think President Trump is going to win the election. Let me just say a couple of things about Professor Lichtman before, so all your viewers have a better sense. Professor Lichtman is a partisan Democrat. He ran for the U.S. Senate in 2006 in Maryland and lost in the primary. He also published a book in 2017, right at the beginning of the Trump administration, calling the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump right after his election. And these keys have only been implied, seems to imply it's been around for a long time. He's only applied them since 2000. And arguably the two most important elections closest, 2000, he got it wrong. Al Gore did not become president of the United States, and George Bush became president. In 2016, he predicted that President Trump, which he did not mention, would win the popular vote, not the electoral vote, and it was the other way around. President Trump actually lost the popular vote, although Allan Lichtman predicted he would win the popular vote. There used to be an adage in this country that how New Hampshire goes, so goes the country. First for primaries and then elections. Of course, these things have changed. So the two most important elections, Professor Lichtman has gotten them wrong, and he's got it wrong for this election. There's a reason that Kamala Harris is now desperately doing interviews on Fox. She did one today. She's changed her strategy. My friends on the left would say, and they were saying for several months, well, a strategy is working, the basement strategy and the tall grass, hiding and just doing things with friendly audiences. The reason there's a change is because they're concerned with the numbers, particularly with minority voters, who she has a huge problem with. Without that coalition of black men, who now is double-digit number, what President Trump has, and with Latinos, she can't win the election.
But, Adolfo, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that she's only been in this campaign for 3 months, and she's going toe-to-toe with Donald Trump.
Well, she's been in power for 3.5 years, and although she hides from the record, she has a record to run on. It's 3.5 years. She's vice president. She's not an unknown figure to the American people. She wasn't a vice president elected in 2000. The problem is, and why she's losing is, there's a continuity. She keeps turning the page. Yes, we want to turn the page from Harris-Biden administration. She's a known commodity, Anna, in this, and that's the problem she has. She's not an unknown, and she's not Senator Klobuchar running for office. She's a sitting vice president of the United States.
Okay, Douglas Sloan, Kamala Harris has been on something of a media blitz. She's been doing interviews with all the media in this final stage of campaigning. She's just, in fact, done an interview with Fox News. To Adolfo's point, is this a sign that she is struggling and still trying really hard to introduce herself to voters, to tell them who she is, and that, most importantly, that she's a different person from her boss, Joe Biden?
Absolutely not. Kamala Harris is going around doing a media blitz and appealing to Republicans because she has Republican support. She just did a speech in Pennsylvania in front of a group of Republicans, former elected Republican officials. She has, there's no presidents or former vice presidents of the Republican Party that actually support Trump, they're actually supporting Kamala Harris, which is unprecedented. The former Joint Chiefs of Staff, the former Vice President, Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, those are stalwart Republicans, institutional, dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, and they've come out in support of Kamala Harris. So what you're seeing is her looking to capitalize on those cracks in the Republican base, where you have dyed-in-the-wool stalwart Republicans coming out to support Kamala Harris. So she sees that she can actually go out and peel some of these Republicans off, some of these Republicans that are never going to vote for Trump, some of these Republicans that were voting for Nikki Haley until her last day in office. A lot of these Republicans that simply said, there's no way that I could vote for someone as fascist and who says he's going to be a dictator on day one like Donald Trump. So that's what you're seeing. And I will take issue with my good friend Adolfo regarding this. She's been in power for 3 years. Adolfo, you know better than that. She hasn't been in power for 3 years. She's a vice president. According to the U.S. Constitution, the role of the vice president is to implement the president's agenda, to stand in for the president if something goes wrong, and to break ties in the Senate.
Douglas,
she is not able to implement her own policy initiatives or anything like that.
She has said she's the last person in the room. She has said she's been involved in every major decision. Yeah. She has said she's involved in his partner. She's out there taking Al Gore was a very activist vice president. So was Dick Cheney, and she alleges she was involved in all these decisions.
All right, I need to move on here. I need to move on here. Douglas, I just want to get back to you on one point that you mentioned a moment ago. You said that Kamala Harris has been getting support from Republicans. You mentioned Dick Cheney as well as Liz Cheney, but there are also people, voters, and among them Democrats, who are not very happy with the fact that she is getting support from Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. They are kind of posing the question, do I really want to support someone who gets these kinds of endorsements?
Yeah, I don't think that that's that big of an issue. I think that really just speaks to the size and breadth of the Harris coalition, which is actually starting to resemble the Obama coalition. We're talking about a true big tent in this regard, where not only is she attracting Democrats, moderate Democrats, liberal Democrats, but she's also attracting moderate conservatives and extreme conservatives like Dick Cheney. You can't get more Republican and conservative and stalwart and dyed-in-the-wool regarding Republicans and conservative values than Dick and Liz Cheney, and she has them in her camp. So I think that this is just emblematic of a larger tent of support than we have ever seen from any Democrat run for office. We've never seen Republicans come out and support Kamala Harris, a Democratic candidate this way, and we welcome them aboard.
Okay, I will get back to you on that big tent in a moment, but I want to talk to Rafael Bernal, who's here with us in the studio. Rafael, great to see you. Now, Trump continues to hammer Harris on immigration and the border issue as well, and he says he will solve the problem. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
I will rescue every town across America that has been invaded and conquered. They've conquered our country. This is an invasion of a military force. They have weapons that are on par with our U.S. military.
So, Rafael, is Trump gaining any traction on this particular issue, which could possibly decide the outcome?
I mean, by saying these things that are, verifiably false, Trump is appealing more and more and more to his base. He is playing the greatest hits and turning up the volume. And that contrasts very much to what Harris is doing, which is basically trying to chip away at the edges, people who feel uncomfortable with Trump when he says these things. We obviously won't know which strategy works until Election Day, and that's part of why this election seems to be so close. They're coming at it from very opposite ends, and what Trump does is smart in the sense that it sort of gives permission to anyone with whom this message resonates even a little bit. It gives them permission to say, well, if I feel like there's an invasion, which there's not, if I feel like there's an invasion, I better vote for the guy who's talking about it.
Right, but the message from Trump to the electorate is that she's responsible for whatever immigration crisis the country is facing right now, and people are buying that, aren't they?
Well, some are, some aren't. Some aren't. I mean, that's sort of like the let's call it the Oppo research element of his campaign. She is obviously going to get blamed for every Biden policy, whether it worked or whether it didn't.
Right.
And he's going to talk about every Biden policy, whether it worked or whether it didn't, as having failed.
Yeah.
And that's just, I mean, he didn't really have a choice there. The manner in which he does it is a little bit unorthodox, but then again, Trump has been, maybe he is the orthodoxy now. That's not surprising. But that element, I mean, it would be political malpractice to not do that.
Adolfo, Kamala Harris, she says that supporting Trump is not just a huge risk for the United States, but it's also dangerous. Let's listen to her.
He's talking about that he considers anyone who doesn't support him or who will not bend to his will an enemy of our country.
So, Adolfo, this is not new. We heard this in 2016 when Hillary Clinton claimed that Trump was not fit for office. We're hearing similar criticism right now, this time from Harris. Could it work this time?
Well, it's absolutely what the Democrats have been saying, calling half of the American people MAGA extremist and undemocratic, half of the population. Pundits and others on the press saying that the American people have to be deprogrammed. They're a threat to democracy, not to mention the weaponization of our legal system, which we've talked on this program over many, many months. So this is really rich from the party that has zero tolerance for anything and advocates for censorship. But I had to take a couple of exceptions here to my friends. First of all, absolutely, Rafael, there's no falsehoods. 6.2 million people have come across the border. That's just a fact. And the American people know that this broken border is a consequence of the administration's failed policies and the rescinding of the Trump administration policies through executive orders and abandoning border security. And every poll indicates it, and every poll does correctly blame the American people. You can't have it, both of you, as my friends. 79% of the people say the country's moving in the wrong direction. Who's president?
But
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That's who's in charge. You talk about a big tent. When I was in Boy Scouts, it was a pup tent. That's what they have. They're losing black voters. They're losing Latino voters.
Yeah.
And to say that these what current office holders in the country are against Republican or against Donald Trump? Donald Trump has 88% of registered Republicans supporting him, higher than she has in terms of Democrats.
Right.
You have Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat who ran for president, endorsing President Trump.
Yeah.
You have RFK Jr., the Kennedy family, supporting President Trump. This idea that there's this coalition is falling apart. What do you think they rolled out President Obama on this? That they know that they're in trouble, and they're in serious trouble because their policies have failed, and President Trump has said zero falsehoods. This border policy has been an invasion of the country, and every state is now
Adolfo, we're running out of time. I want to give Rafael a chance to respond to that.
Well, if you did call it an invasion, you would imply to know something about the intentionality of the people who are coming in here, and that intentionality is actually, to attack the country, to change the sovereignty of the United States.
Open border.
But you would imply that about the migrants themselves. So you don't know that, and it's obviously not the case. Yeah. And then to say that they're as strong as the U.S. military, well, you must not have a very high opinion of the U.S. military.
Well,
okay. Let me get to Douglas Sloan.
I would like to say something in this regard.
Go ahead.
Come on. Border crossings are at their lowest rate in decades, okay? Under the Biden administration. Also, it was Trump that struck down the bipartisan border bill that was put forth by Senator Langford from Oklahoma. Trump told all of the congressional Republicans not to vote for it, and that was
one Republican supported that bill after 3.5 years of failures of this administration. They're getting religion at the last minute.
Okay, look, we're going to have one at a time. Douglas.
They're reinstituting Trump policies.
Douglas, I want to get to you. You were talking earlier on about the big tent, the big coalition, that winning coalition, as you would hope that Kamala Harris is building right now. She is losing support among African-American voters, though, isn't she? I mean, some of those are down to economic concerns. She's also pledging tax cuts for middle-income people, for low-income people as well. I mean, what does she do right now to shore up that support among African Americans?
Well, I think a lot of this has to do with some polling by some of the larger polling outfits, as opposed to polling outfit like Brilliant Corners that are showing strong African American support, and a lot of the mishmash that you're hearing on social media and Twitter, which is not something that should be considered. We have to really look at some indicators outside of polling, like early voting. Early voting in Georgia is through the roof. That shows generally early voting as Democrats. A lot of voter enthusiasm.
Yeah, but Douglas, you know, Douglas, we also had former President Obama go out there, and he almost blamed black male voters if she loses, saying this will be your fault if she does that. And there was a fierce reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, and Adolfo said, oh my God, they have Obama out here. They must really be nervous. Of course, we're going to have our most recent, besides Biden, Democratic president out there. We have Bill Clinton out there on the trail, too. We're bringing in everybody. This is a very important election.
Right.
And in terms of him addressing black males, well, yeah, you know, it did seem that, hey, you know, some black males weren't as enthusiastic about her campaign as black women.
Right, Douglas, I'm going to interrupt you there because I've only got 40 seconds left. I'm going to get very quickly to Rafael. Rafael, early voting now underway in the state of Georgia. We're getting reports that record numbers of voters are turning out. What do you read into that very quickly?
Well, usually you would read that Democrats have an advantage, but I think more Republicans are doing early voting, so you can't read that as much. You see both campaigns a little bit in panic mode. The Democrats, they're taking more risks. The Fox News interview. The Republicans, they're putting out this message: we've got it in the bag. This is done. So I think both campaigns, well, neither knows where this is going, frankly.
Very quickly, in 5 seconds, why do you think more Republicans are getting out with early voting right now?
I think it's just gotten more commonplace, and they know that they don't want to give that advantage to Democrats as much.
Okay, well, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. We have to leave it there. I'm Allan in Washington, D.C.